In this video, let us learn about some of the brainstem reflexes. There are some of these reflexes which have their reflex arc restricted to one part of the brainstem, like cuff and the gag reflex having the reflex arc at the level of medulla, corneal reflex and jaw jerk having the reflex arc at the level of pons, or pupillary light reflex having the reflex arc at the level of midbrain. And there are some other reflexes which have their reflex arcs at all the levels of brainstem, like for example, oculocephalic reflex or the vestibulo-ocular reflexes. A physician tries to elicit these reflexes to check for the integrity of the brainstem. So let us find out how to elicit these reflexes as well as what are their reflex arc pathways. Let us begin with the swallowing reflex. When the food enters the oropharynx, it stimulates the branches of glossopharyngeal nerve, which carries this information to nucleus of tractus solitarius. Nucleus of tractus solitarius then will project to nucleus ambiguus via the reticular formation. Nucleus ambiguus has neurons which will supply the muscles of soft palate, larynx, pharynx as well as upper esophagus. The fibers which are starting from here will project through either 9th cranial nerve or the 10th cranial nerve or the cranial accessory or the 11th cranial nerve. Those fibers which reach the pharynx will result in the contraction of pharyngeal muscles, which sets in the peristaltic movement that moves through the wall of esophagus. Those fibers which reach the larynx will result in elevation of the larynx and closure of the glottis so that food doesn't accidentally enter into the respiratory tract. Those fibers which reach the soft palate will result in closure of the nasopharyngeal isthmus so that the food doesn't get back into nasopharynx and nasal cavity. Nucleus ambiguus will also project inhibitory fibers to the sympathetic neurons in the spinal cord. Now they will project to the cardiac sphincter and result in its relaxation, and therefore that will also facilitate the swallowing. So afferent limb for swallowing reflex is by the 9th cranial nerve, and efferent limb for the swallowing reflex is by 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerves. Now gag reflex actually utilizes the same pathway. The only difference is instead of food stimulating the 9th cranial nerve, here some other stimulus will be stimulating the wall of the oropharynx. It could be a nasogastric tube insertion, it could be intubation, or it could be a doctor trying to elicit the gag reflex by stroking the posterior wall of the oropharynx by a spatula. So when the physician tries to elicit this reflex, he observes for the contraction of palatal muscles. Absence of this reflex indicates injury to the brainstem, especially at the medullary level. Sometimes, however, the gag reflex may be a little exaggerated, wherein it may be eliciting both retching as well as vomiting. Now coming to cuff reflex. Now cuff reflex again is mediated at the level of medulla. Irritation of the mucosa of larynx and trachea will set in the cuff reflex. Now this information is carried by the vagus nerve to the medulla, wherein the information will be relayed in the trigeminal sensory nuclei. Now these trigeminal sensory nuclei will project to medullary respiratory centers. Now medullary respiratory centers will project to spinal cord, wherein they'll be projecting to the motor neurons supplying the intercostal muscles and abdominal muscles. So their contraction will result in exhalation. And medullary respiratory centers will also project to nucleus ambiguus, which projects back to the larynx, which will result in closure of the glottis. So basically between these two projections from the medullary respiratory center, what we get is an energetic exhalation against the closed glottis, what is known as cuff. So here the afferent limb is mediated by 10th nerve and efferent limb is also mediated by the 10th nerve for the cuff reflex. Now coming to sneeze reflex. The sneeze reflex is set in by the irritation of the nasal mucosa. Now this information is carried by the branches of ophthalmic and maxillary nerve. They will carry this information to the trigeminal sensory nuclei, which will then project to the medullary respiratory centers. As we have seen earlier, the medullary respiratory centers will project to the motor neurons in the spinal cord, which will be supplying not only the intercostals and the abdominal muscles, but also the diaphragm. And there is also projection to the nucleus ambiguus, which will project back to larynx, which will result in closure of glottis. So between these two projections, what we get is an initial sharp inhalation followed by an explosive exhalation against the closure of glottis. At this time, if there is a projection to the oropharynx, there will be closure of the oropharyngeal isthmus by contraction of the palatoglossus and palatopharyngeus muscle. Therefore, the air is allowed to escape through the nose, resulting in a sneeze. So, afferent limb of this reflex is mediated through the ophthalmic and maxillary branches of the trigeminal, and efferent limb is mediated by the 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerves. So these three reflexes, that is swallowing cum gag reflex, the cough and the sneeze reflex, they were all having the reflex arcs at the level of medulla. Now next, coming to the jaw jerk. Stretching the muscles acting on the jaw like temporalis, masseter and medial pterygoid muscles by lightly tapping on the chin using a knee hammer will activate the muscle spindles in these muscles, and this proprioceptive information is carried by the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve to the mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Now, as we have already noted earlier, this mesencephalic nucleus is formed by the first order neurons. These are the only first order neurons located within the central nervous system, and they are also the unipolar neurons. Now, they will project monosynaptically to the motor nucleus of trigeminal nerve, which in turn will send branches or fibers back to the same muscles, making them contract, resulting in closure of the jaw, known as jaw jerk. So stretching the muscles resulting in the closure of the jaw, that is what we call as jaw jerk. This is the only monosynaptic supraspinal reflex. Both afferent and efferent fibers will be of component of the reflex arc is mediated by mandibular division of trigeminal nerve. This reflex will be brisk or exaggerated in case of any lesion at a level higher than the pons. It could be in internal capsule or in the midbrain level. However, the lesion has to be bilateral, or the lesion can be absent in case of injury to the pontine levels. Now coming to corneal reflex. Touching the cornea with a wisp of cotton will set in the corneal reflex. This information is carried by the nasociliary branch of the ophthalmic division of trigeminal. Because there is corneal irritation, this information is carried to spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Now, spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve will then project to the facial nucleus via the reticular formation. This facial nerve will carry the information to the orbicularis oculi, which will result in closure of the eye. That is a reflex arc. It has multiple components, however. There is an early response wherein the minute you touch the cornea of a particular eye, there will be ipsilateral blink. Now that is because from the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, the projection is to the ipsilateral facial nucleus. This will be followed by a late response which includes bilateral blink. That is, the information from the reticular formation will not only reach the facial nucleus of the same side, it will also reach the facial nucleus of the opposite side. So both eyelids will be blinking. And this will be further followed by an opening of the eye. That is because from the reticular formation, the projection is also to the oculomotor nucleus, which will be supplying the levator palpebrae superioris. So eyes blink and then they open. And because there is corneal irritation, often this is compounded by a tearing response. That is because of the projection from the reticular formation to the lacrimatory nucleus, which will be projecting to pterygopalatine ganglion and subsequently supplying the lacrimal glands. So that's the corneal reflex, which has its main reflex arc at the level of pons. So simple way to elicit is just touch the cornea with a wisp of cotton, and that will result in reflex blinking. So afferent limb is mediated by ophthalmic division of the trigeminal and efferent limb by the facial nerve or the 7th cranial nerve. Now coming to pupillary light reflex. This is elicited by first making the patient sit in a dark room. We shine a light in one eye at a time. Observe for pupillary constriction. Constriction of the same pupil is known as direct light reflex. Observing pupillary constriction in the opposite eye is the consensual response, the consensual light reflex. So let us find out the pathways for both these. For the direct pupillary light reflex, when we shine light in one eye, this will stimulate the retina. The information is carried to the optic nerve and optic tract of the same side. These fibers will reach the lateral geniculate body, where most of the fibers will relay. Those fibers which do not relay in the lateral geniculate body will pass through the superior brachium to reach the superior colliculus. Some of these fibers will reach the pretectal nucleus of the same side. The pretectal nucleus then will project to the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of the same side. Now, Edinger-Westphal nucleus has preganglionic parasympathetic neurons, which will travel with the oculomotor nerve, and they will relay in the ciliary ganglion. Now, from the ciliary ganglion, the postganglionic parasympathetic fibers will travel through the short ciliary nerves to reach the sphincter pupillae, resulting in contraction or the constriction of the pupil of the same eye. Now, this is the direct light reflex. Now, coming to the consensual reflex, here we shine light in one eye. The fibers are going through the optic nerve. At the level of optic chiasma, the fibers which are coming from the temporal half of the retina will go along the optic tract of the same side, reaching the lateral geniculate body of the same side. But the fibers which are coming from the nasal half of the retina will cross to the opposite side and travel in the opposite optic tract to reach the lateral geniculate body of the opposite side. So now the information has reached both sides. Again, most of the fibers will relay in the lateral geniculate body, but those that do not relay will pass through the superior brachium to reach the superior colliculi, and they reach both-sided pretectal nuclei. So bilateral pretectal nuclei are activated. From each pretectal nucleus, the projection is not only to the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of the same side, but it is again also to the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of the opposite side. So bilateral Edinger-Westphal nuclei are stimulated by both pretectal nuclei. And as we said earlier, from the Edinger-Westphal nuclei, the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers will travel through the oculomotor nerve, relay in the ciliary ganglion, and postganglionic fibers through the short ciliary nerves to the sphincter pupillae of both side eyes. Therefore, we get not only a direct reflex, that is the pupillary constriction of the same eye, but we also get a consensual response, that is pupillary constriction in the opposite eye. So this reflex arc is at the level of midbrain. Now coming to oculocephalic reflex. It's a reflex movement of the eyes in the opposite direction whenever we move the head to one side. This is to stabilize the image on the retina. Now the reflex arc is mediated by third nerve, sixth nerve, vestibular part of the eighth cranial nerve, as well as through the medial longitudinal fasciculus. So basically, you move the head of the patient rapidly to the right and to the left. When a patient is looking at you, if you turn his head to the right side, the eyes will automatically turn to the left to keep the image of you fixed on their retina or whatever point they'll be focusing on. And similarly, when the head is moved to the left, the eyes automatically turn to the right in the opposite direction to keep fixed on the image which they will be watching earlier. Now, this type of movement of the eye is called as Doll's eye movement, as shown by the upper set of diagrams here. And this is a normal response. In case there is a negative Doll's eye, that is, when you move the person's head to the right, the eyes will also follow to the right direction. Or when you move the head to the left side, eyes will also move to the left. Now that's a negative Doll's eye response, which indicates brainstem lesion. That's the oculocephalic reflex. And then we have vestibulo-ocular reflex, or otherwise known as caloric test, which we have dealt in detail when we were studying the vestibular nucleus in one of our videos on medulla. And here what we do is we introduce cold water in the external acoustic meatus and observe the nystagmus, which sets in, which has a fast component of the oscillation in the opposite direction. And then we introduce warm water, which is about 8 to 9 degrees more than the body temperature. And again, observe the oscillatory response that will be having a fast component in the same direction. So this is a normal caloric test or a normal caloric response. This is mediated again by the 8th cranial nerve, 3rd and 6th cranial nerves, and of course along the medial longitudinal fasciculus. When there is no caloric response, that indicates brainstem lesion. So there are a set of criteria to declare that a person is brain dead. Apart from the EEG, we will be eliciting these brainstem reflexes to check whether the brainstem is intact or having a lesion. So if a patient is found to be having fixed and dilated pupils, that is both eyes do not constrict with light being shown through them, no corneal reflex or jaw jerk, no vestibulo-ocular reflex or oculocephalic reflex, no gag reflex or cuff reflex, and this corroborated with EEG, we can declare a person as brain dead. So we should be knowing how to elicit these reflexes to be able to identify whether a person's brainstem is intact or having a lesion. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed this video. You can visit this site for other neuroanatomy videos. Thank you.